What's good, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Over Quota. Please don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review if you haven't already. And like always, the J. David Group, which is my company, is sponsoring this episode. We help recruit today's go-to-market teams that help build the next generation of unicorns. And like I've been saying lately, you can't build unicorns if you don't have goats. Also, be on the lookout for the Goats of Growth book that I've been working on, hopefully to come out by the end of 2023. The Goats of Growth book, the untold stories of the greatest revenue leaders of all time. So I don't have a guest today. I'm my guest because getting towards the end of the month here, and unfortunately I had a couple of cancellations from a couple of sales leaders last week. So I usually record the episodes a week in advance, but today, as I would normally publish an episode of an interview, I don't have one. So I'm just going to riff here about another goat that I'd like to have on not only this podcast, but more importantly, to feature in my book, Goats of Growth. So just a little backstory before I get into it. I listened to other podcasts, of course, to just try to inform myself of more information and whatever else is going on. And I came across a podcast called Revenue Builders, hosted by John McMahon and John Kaplan. And they were interviewing Chris Degnan, who's the Chief Revenue Officer of Snowflake. This was about a month or so ago. And I listened to that interview and I was fascinated with it and moved to write a post about it because I had heard so many traits and behaviors and all hallmarks, I guess, if you will, of what I believe makes a fantastic sales leader in Chris Degnan. So I broke that down, all of the traits and behaviors that I thought were applicable in that interview. And John McMahon, obviously I tagged him in it, and he had sent me a message afterwards letting me know that he had written a book that he thought I might be interested in called The Qualified Sales Leader. So I got The Qualified Sales Leader, not really knowing too much about John. I glimpsed at his profile on LinkedIn a couple of times, but didn't really spend too much time looking at it because I'd just been listening to his podcast. But immediately what stuck out was, obviously when I picked up the book, is one of the people that gave him an endorsement, so to speak, or recommended the book. On the very first page of the book says John McMahon is the GOAT of enterprise software sales. And I said, wow, shame on me for not having John McMahon on my radar for that episode. But I was sure glad that I did, and I was happy to have picked up the book. And this is literally the only book that I've read ever that made me want to start a book club, frankly, because of, as I was going through the book and reading the book, I just thought there's got to be so many more people, obviously, that are interested in what he's writing about, and the level of detail that he shares, and because of his experience, and I'll tell you a little bit more about his experience in a minute, but the level of experience that he had and the level of detail, I couldn't put the book down. And not only did I not want to put the book down, but I wanted it to continue in some way. I wanted to talk to people about it, and which is why I'm doing this episode. But talk to people and get people's thoughts and feedback and dissect everything that he was saying in the book, because it was just, like I said, it was just so compelling and so revealing of all of the things that qualified sales leaders, in this case CROs, need to do. And why he's so qualified himself is that John was the sales leader at 5 startup companies that eventually went public. 5 startup companies that eventually went public, and he was the CRO at all of those startup companies, right? The CRO of all of those startup companies, including PTC, Geotel, Ariba, Blade Logic, and BMC. And in particular, with PTC, he grew it from $1 million in revenue to $1 just over $1 billion in just over 9 years, which, obviously anybody with that story alone qualifies for a Goat of Growth. But then to follow that up with 4 more startup companies that all went public, where he was the CRO at all of them, and then to be on the board of Snowflake, as I had mentioned, where Chris Degnan is, MongoDB, Lacework, and Sigma, and then also he advised, and Mark Roberge from former HubSpot CRO has always said on a number of occasions that he learned pretty much everything that he learned in sales from John McMahon. So he was an advisor at HubSpot, AppDynamic, Glassdoor, Drift, and Sprinkler. And so, the question is that, why wouldn't you read The Qualified Sales Leader when someone as qualified as John McMahon wrote the book, right? So so I don't want to necessarily, the book is fantastic. I don't want to, I'm not here to give it give you my review necessarily. I urge you to go read the book. But one of the things that I wanted to do was to dissect all of the, I'll call it core characteristics, I guess, or not even characteristics, but yeah, I guess characteristics of what I think makes up a qualified sales leader based on what John shared in the book, right? And before I get into, there's 13 of them, 13 aspects, characteristics, traits, skills, whatever you want to call it, that based on my reading of it, really make up what a qualified sales leader is. And if you want to be a qualified sales leader, these are the things that need to be done. If you're looking for a qualified sales leader, these are the things that you should be looking for and screening, and certainly putting in your job description as you're writing them. But before I get into them, I think at its core, or at their core, qualified sales leaders should be great at 3 primary aspects of the job. First is near and dear to my heart, of course, which is recruiting A players, right? To have an ability to recruit the best people available for the team. Second is coaching and holding their team and their people accountable. So they need to be great at that. And then lastly, but certainly not least, is accurately forecasting, the ability to forecast accurately. If they're able to, and this is something, that I want to say about that is that if they're able to accurately forecast, it allows the CEO, as John wrote in his book, to determine hiring allocations. Okay. If they hire too many people, the burn rate will increase. And if they don't hire enough people, the product might suffer, customers will suffer, and the business won't scale as fast. So they need to get those first 3 things right: recruiting A players, coaching and holding people accountable, and forecasting accurately. And of course, it's one thing to forecast accurately. It's another thing to forecast accurately and be at, or frankly, above forecast, right? To be above plan, right? And so those first 2 things, recruiting A players and coaching and holding people accountable, are obviously going to get you to not only accurate forecasting, but to exceed expectations on a consistent basis. All right, so let me just jump into my takeaways in no real particular order, but just talk to you about what I would be looking for if I were to be looking for the next CRO after reading this book, or if I'm an aspiring sales leader or I am a sales leader, I would, look at these things. Okay. So first thing is to be a great coach. So if you have someone that has an ability to identify and improve areas of weakness, and then teach them in a way where the recipient understands how to use the information to get better, almost to the point where you're geeking out about coaching and transforming people. It's so important. And again, just it's not only does John share the importance of coaching in the book, but just the way that he recants a lot of his own experience and details some of the conversations that he had with the company that he mentions in the book, and how he actually coached the reps. That's something that just was an overarching, I think, theme in the book to me, sort of like a motif, right? It's John sharing how he sharing with these hiring managers how they should lead and coach their people, while John is actually exhibiting all of these traits himself, right, during all this, as he's telling the story and giving examples. So a great coach, you have to be a great coach. The second thing, to be a great recruiter, as I just alluded to at the beginning in terms of recruiting A players, but really what does it mean is to identify core character traits that increase the likelihood of success. So if you look at, well-known coaches in sports, I'm a big sports fan, so I'm going to use those as examples, but like Gino Auriemma at UConn women's basketball, or John Calipari, the head basketball coach at University of Kentucky, or Nick Saban, the head football coach at Alabama, right? Like, these are the greatest coaches of their generation, and could argue of all time, right? Speaking of GOATs, right? And so the question becomes with all of them, and it always is, are they great coaches, or are they just great recruiters, and they're able to get A players that might mask the otherwise ineffective coaching, right? You don't really know, right? And you can even look at, I guess you can, the old Bill Belichick, Tom Brady example, whereas, how effective would Bill Belichick have been had it not been for Tom Brady, who's obviously an A player, right? So to be a great coach and to be a great recruiter, or certainly that's what qualified sales leaders do. Number three, a strong desire to help people succeed, right? That goes back to geeking out about coaching, right? So a strong innate desire to help people to succeed, because it's hard to help other people become better versions of themselves if it doesn't motivate you to, want them to be better, right? And if you're not, then then that's not, as just in reading the book, it doesn't necessarily qualify you to be a great sales leader. One of the things he talks about is specifically about in the book is to have a common vocabulary, right? So this is number four. To be a clear and effective communicator, right? To be a clear and effective communicator. And part of that is to clearly define each element of the sales process that starts with a common vocabulary. Because if you're not a clear and effective communicator, here's what's interesting about this. If you didn't read this book, you might not know to have a common vocabulary for everything. All right. Now, let's say, for instance, if you never pick up this book, if you don't listen to this and you don't hear me sharing this with you, and you're struggling as a sales leader, then if you're a clear and effective communicator, then you will have come around to the fact to know that you need a common vocabulary, or that you need to have some sort of systems in place to communicate. And actually, going back to the coaching example, it's the same deal, right? When you have a quarterback who's calling the plays that are coming from the offensive coordinator or coming from the head coach, there's a vocabulary, right? There's a way of communicating the play so that everybody knows what play they're running all the time, right? And if there's an audible that needs to be called, that has its own vocabulary as well, right? So you need to be a clear and effective communicator so that you can, if somebody doesn't tell you, hey, sales leader, start with a common vocabulary, at least have that core basis of knowing that you need to effectively communicate clearly. And then with a universal and common way to inspect the sales process while holding other people accountable, right? So it's one thing to have a common playbook or a common vocabulary, but then how do you inspect it? How do you actually go out and inspect it in a way where there aren't any surprises, where you can find inefficiencies in the sales process, and then where there are inefficiencies or where people aren't performing up to expectation, that you're able to hold them accountable. And if you're a clear and effective communicator, you'll be able to hold them accountable. The next one is to be empathetic, right? We hear this all the time. I've said it on a number of occasions. I may have even mentioned it in the Chris Degnan post that I did. But when I say empathetic, it means that, think about it, like every rep that you're managing, everybody on your team is motivated by different things. And if you don't get to know them, you won't find out what motivates them. And John has examples of a gentleman by the name of Andy, another sales manager by the name of Jim, and then another sales woman by the name of Kathleen, who I believe in this book was an individual contributor. So forgive me if I'm wrong on that, John, if you happen to listen to this. But but each one of them had different personalities. They came from different backgrounds. They were motivated by different things. And, John does a great job in the book of identifying what those things are, and then nurturing those relationships to build up confidence and to get them to perform at a higher level. Okay. I lost count, frankly, so I'm not sure what number I'm on. It might be number 6, but I didn't number these. But to be patient, right? So imagine when you're painting a house, as an example, and the house needs multiple coats of paint, right? And actually, even before that, you put on primer, let's just say, or you scrape the paint or something like that, right? You need to know, if you've seen houses before, right? Houses that have been fully painted, that eventually the house will look beautiful and that blue will really pop, as an example, right? But it's going to take 2 or 3 coats before that actually happens, and then it dries and all that stuff, and it looks great. And I think when it comes to building confidence and building capabilities, let's just say, in a sales team, and maybe even a once underperforming sales team, as was depicted in this book, that great sales leaders, qualified sales leaders, need to be patient, right? Change is not going to happen overnight, which means you've got to commit to your coaching process and recognize small wins, i.e. the second coat of paint, as indicators that your coaching is working, right? So to have that patience and belief that eventually, when you put on that final coat of paint, when you finally, master that, a certain aspect of the sales process, then success will come. But you really need to be patient. The next one is discipline, right? So a lot of it is hard work. Some of what you will need to do to be more, I'm sorry, let me just say that again. Some of what you need to do will be more fun than others, right? So for instance, like, you might, as a sales leader, really love to ride along with your reps, or to meet the champion within an enterprise account. That might be really fun to you, but then other stuff might not be as fun. Like, I don't know, looking at the pipeline in Salesforce and seeing where deals are. That might not be fun, but it needs to be done. And John shared a quote from Mike Tyson that said, and I love this. This is like the greatest definition of discipline I think I've ever heard, which is, discipline is doing what you hate to do, but doing it like you love it. So discipline is doing what you hate to do, but doing it like you love it. And again, I think to be a great sales leader and to be a qualified sales leader, you have to have a discipline, because it's not always going to be the things that you love to do. The next one, be obsessed with details. So there's a lot to know about every rep, every account, and every challenge and every opportunity within each account for each rep, right? So qualified sales leaders are going to be obsessed with all of those details. And again, if you read the book and you hear about so many elements of the sales process, and then to how to inspect the sales process and the elements within the inspection of the sales process, those are all just details that one might, again, not love to dig into, but you have to be disciplined enough to do that, right? To do that work. I always mention curiosity in terms of top sales reps, but it certainly holds true for sales leaders as well. But the curiosity of a detective, right? In other words, inspect deals to get to the root challenges or potential challenges within each one of those deals. And then don't stop asking questions until you are confident that you have the answer. And as as John takes you into those QBRs or takes you into those one-on-one meetings with the managers, and you really hear how curious and how detailed you need to be in terms of going to that first, second, third level questions with your reps, so that you have all of the answers that you need in order to begin to forecast, right? And if you're a rep, it's what I just said there is no different than when you're going through the qualifying and discovery phase, or frankly all of the entire sales process, right? The entire sales process is one big inspection after another, right? And unless you're curious enough and have the enough of a desire to want to know the answers to these questions, then it's going to be tough for you to sell. It's also going to be tough for you to lead and for you to manage. All right. You have to be proactive, right? It sounds obvious. You got to be proactive. But I mean specifically is, and one of the things that John talks about in the book is inspect deals early in the quarter, meet the champions early in the quarter, right? You have to do that because you don't want to be in a situation where you're 30 days in, 60 days in, 80 days into the quarter, and you realize that a particular deal is not going to close. That's in the forecast, right? That's on the forecast. That might have to push to the next quarter, or you might have to take it off of the forecast entirely, right? And the reason why that proactivity is important, if you will, is because if you know early enough in the quarter that there's a strong likelihood that you aren't going to close that deal in the quarter, then you can go to the rep and really help them focus on generating pipeline and finding other deals that will make up for that one that's probably not going to close in that quarter, right? And to be proactive enough and to have obviously everybody knows this, but a multiple of opportunities, a multiple of the pipeline, so that you can get to your number for that quarter. But again, I think the key there is to be proactive so that you're way ahead of what any challenges might come up, right? That goes to the next thing, which is data driven. You have to be data driven. You got to know how many opportunities are being added to the pipeline and which activities are driving those opportunities, right? Again, that goes back to looking at the numbers, looking in Salesforce and seeing what kind of activities are being entered and what kind of activities are being generated. Again, this could certainly be right up at the top of the list, but again, these are in no in particular order. But to be a great listener, right? You got to listen carefully to what's being said, but also, more importantly, listen to your intuition to really tell you what's not being said. Because if you're a sales leader, you're in a QBR with your reps, and you're inspecting deals and you're going through certain deals that they have forecasted. You're listening carefully, and again, you're asking those next level questions, using your curiosity to get to the real answer, so that you can forecast accurately. But you also have to listen to what's not being said, like listen to your gut, right? And he talks about that in the book too as well. Listen to your gut, trust your gut. If there's something that's not being said, or something just doesn't feel right, don't just take it at its on the surface, right? You got to be able to dig deeper. You're not able to dig deeper if you're not listening, right? And we talked about simple things in the QBR, like just put everything away, focus on the task at hand, which is listening to your reps. Don't have your laptops, or be surfing online, or if your laptops are open, be taking notes as an example. So, and then the last thing, again, whether it's just a behavior, I guess, if you will, is be organized and manage your time appropriately. Because if you have multiple reps, multiple deals, and multiple stages with multiple challenges, time management and being organized is really important, because everything that I mentioned through all of these, they're hard to do in and of themselves. They're really hard to do if you always feel like you are stressed and pressed for time and frankly disorganized, because if you're disorganized, it's likely that you're not proactive. If you're not proactive, you're not going to have time to, let's say, inspect the pipeline. You're not going to be able to accurately forecast. You're not, there's a whole host of negative consequences to not forecast, not being organized or managing your time appropriately. So again, this is the book actually. Let me just hold it up for people who are seeing this on video. The Qualified Sales Leader, Proven Lessons from a 5-time CRO by John McMahon. I hope he'll be in the Goats of Growth book, because I don't think it'll be a complete book. Actually, I know it won't be a complete book if I don't have John McMahon in the book. So again, if anybody wants to start a book club, frankly, starting with this book, and perhaps we'll go into other books, hit me up, let me know. All right, that's it. Goodbye, everybody. And I'm cueing the music. Thank you for listening.